He Had Plans for Me by Gen Legend 3. So yesterday I was at my sister's house with my mum watching my son and nephews playing in the yard. One of my nephews, Harrison, was picking bark off a tree at the time. I then remembered an odd encounter that I had as a kid. It was so weird. I was thinking aloud and my mum heard me say this. My mum then inquired what I was talking about, so I decided to tell her. When I was a kid, I was hanging out at the Pinecone Forest. This is what the neighbourhood kids called a small patch of trees behind the road that was near where we lived. I was picking bark off one of the trees and I needed to pass some time because my friend Frankie was doing his homework and was yet to come out and play. Out of nowhere suddenly, this guy come up to me. I could smell him before I saw him. He smelled like stale cigarette smoke. I was kinda scared when I looked at him. He wasn't very old, but he had a very lazy eye that was cloudy. His teeth and fingernails were stained yellow. My mum taught me to be nice to people even when they don't look it, so I faked a smile and said hello. "What are you doing?" he asked me. Now the smell of his breath was probably the worst thing about him. I'm picking bark off this tree." "You shouldn't do that. It's like picking the tree's skin. How would you like it if somebody picked your skin off?" he said while lightly pinching my arm with his yellow fingernails. "I don't know," I replied and got my arm back off him. Just then, Frankie's mum called out for me out of the door, asking me to come and wait inside. I didn't think anything of the whole thing at the time, but when I told my mum about it, she had this look of, I don't know, guilt maybe. She said that it was probably about time that I knew the whole story. Apparently she never told me about it until now because she thought that I'd forgot about the whole encounter. So first of all, you should know that the neighbourhood I grew up in was a small tight-knit community. Everybody knew everybody, and there was no reason for an outsider to come in unless they knew somebody there. So here's what happened with this guy. Frankie's mum, Sonna, noticed that there was a white van with no windows parked on the side of the road. Now she didn't recognise it, but she figured that maybe it was just a visitor for a neighbour. Sonna said, or rather told the police, the van had been there all morning and afternoon. She was keeping an eye on it. She just had this bad feeling about it. Now she had this huge front window that actually faced out onto the pine forest. The van was parked right next to it. She saw me waiting for Frankie and kept a constant eye on the van while holding the phone just in case. She then saw the man jump out of the back of the van and then walk up to me. As soon as she saw him grab my arm and pinch me, she decided to call the cops. That was when she called me into her house. The cops stopped the guy just outside of my neighbourhood. In the back of the van they found that there were binoculars, a Polaroid camera, pictures of me taped all over the walls and ceilings, me at school, at my grandparents' house, and at the bank with my mum. Just everywhere I went to. But that's not all. He had a key to a storage unit on him. Inside the unit, they found it was full of knives. I mean a lot of knives. Paring knives, a butcher knife, a thin fillet knife, a melon baller, and various knives of all shapes and sizes. There was also a few books about anatomy. There was some other surgical equipment, duct tape, and about 10 empty gallon buckets. In the middle of the unit there was an old bed that was used to restrain mental patients, so it had wrist and ankle straps, and the entire inside of the unit was covered in plastic wrap. My mum said he was in a high security mental institution for the criminally insane. That's the last I ever heard of that guy. A rest stop for the night by Operation Filth. About 3 weeks ago, my mother told me and my brother this story. Sally is a lifelong family friend. Sally would frequently visit her friends and family in Oklahoma, We live in a small town in southern Ontario, Canada. Sally would drive. She would drive about 20 hours straight, at least overnight, to get from our town to another small town. She did this simply to save money, and obviously wanted to arrive ASAP. Anyway, now onto the story. About 30 years ago, she decided to head south on a visit. No big deal, she's done this a few times. So she packs up and heads out. At some point, after driving about 14 or 15 hours, she started getting really tired. Being as it was probably the 80s, it was a little safer, so she decided that she would stop at a rest stop. She was gonna sleep for a little bit and then resume her drive first thing in the AM. She then parks in a very well lit area and rests. She parks by the lights and felt at ease because there were an abundance of travellers stopping and going. She gets out for a bathroom break, comes back and then settles into her car. About then, another RV pulls up beside her and the elderly couple jump out. The man asks her about coming from Canada. They strike up a little conversation, nothing odd. The couple talk to Sally for a bit. They tell her they are driving from the south, going north, and just that they needed to sleep for the night. They wanted to talk because they are unsure if the rest stop was okay to stay at, but seeing Sally, they are at ease. They say goodnight and have a good trip, and the couple then went back to their RV. Sally locks up her doors and went to sleep. 2 or 3 hours later, she woke up with a really unsettling feeling. She looks around, sees nothing. A few people going in the stop. Parking lights are all still on. She assumes that the reason she has this bad feeling is because a car isn't the best place to sleep in. After about 10 minutes, she said that that feeling actually gets worse, and it's just constant now. She sits back and tries to shrug it off. This apparently doesn't work. She had every red alarm and instinct telling her to go. She panics, starts her car, and speeds off. She doesn't care where, she just knew that she had to get away from there. So about 20 minutes down the road, she finds a motel and gas station to stop at. She decides to see if she could get a room from what little money she had. She then converses with the person in charge and he cuts her a deal. As he doesn't want a young woman driving alone at night, she gets a key, pops in her hotel room and sleeps for the night with no issues at all. Around 9 AM, she wakes up, showers, changes clothes and decides to relax for a few. She turns on the TV and what was on it actually gave her the worst chills of her life. There was an elderly couple that was killed in the middle of the night. The news shows the RV. That was the one that Sally was parked next to, in the exact same rest stop next to her, and she sees a fast food drink cup she dropped on an accident that rolled under the car. Sometime during the night, a man broke into their RV and killed them, then left. Presumably, right before Sally had left. The man was never caught, and since then, Sally never stopped in anywhere but a hotel for the night.
I never thought to share this story here, but a few months ago I posted about it briefly in another subreddit, and everyone suggested I share it here also. Some of you may have seen it the last time I shared it. I believe the day after the 4th of July, and my husband and I were in the middle of a cross-country road trip. We were driving through Texas, and for any of you who have driven across the entire state of Texas, you know that it is very long and very barren. Sometimes we go hours without seeing anything at all, and the towns we did pass through didn't consist of much more than a rusty old gas station and a few dusty little houses. Looking out the window, you would swear you were just driving through the same 5 miles of desert again and again. I had started to get a headache, and my husband suggested I take a quick nap to get rid of it. I remember allowing myself to doze off as I watched the beautiful colours of the desert sunset. The slowing of the car woke me up, and the first thing I noticed is how dark it was. I believe it was around 10 PM. My husband had stopped at a gas station with a small shop. He told me he was going in to grab us some food, and asked if I needed to pee. Knowing I might not have another chance for quite a while, I went into the shop and used the restroom. Both the men's and women's restrooms were down a little hall from the open area of the shop. I was groggy and tired and realised how badly I needed to pee, so I shuffled into the restroom. As I made the way the short distance from the door to the nearest two stalls, I made eye contact with a woman coming out of the only other stall. She didn't quite look homeless, but she was definitely messy looking. She had wild grey hair, almost shoulder length if it hadn't been sticking out of every direction from her head. It looked like it hadn't seen a brush in weeks. She was wearing ragged looking clothing, a pair of ill-fitting black workout shorts, and I remember noting her foam flip-flops. Several layers on top, one of them being a large purple and green coat. Keep in mind that this is Texas in July. The jacket was hanging on her shoulders, crooked, like she hadn't been bothered to take more than a few seconds to put it on. She was carrying something in a tied up plastic grocery bag. I gave her a quick smile as our eyes met, and she just stared at me in return. Then her face turned wild and intense looking. Her eyebrows were set as if she was angry, but her eyes had a wild, alive look. She looked at me like she was hungry, and this was when I felt the first tinge of something wrong. I tried to brush it off. She waddled over to the sink, and I took my time shutting the stall door, because something about her posture in the front of the mirror struck me as pretty odd, and I was trying to figure it out. She was standing with her body more angled towards me, but her face was turned to the mirror. Her body was tensed, legs slightly crouched, as if she was ready to act. Her hands were not up by her face, or trying to fix the mess of hair, or even being washed. They were at her sides' elbows, also slightly bent. I wasn't sure why, but I suddenly felt uncomfortable. I regretted leaving my purse and cell phone behind. I shut and locked the stall door, and took my time using the toilet. I wanted her to be gone before I left the safety of the stall. I stayed there for long after I had finished, but the woman was still there, so I waited longer. Finally, I heard the smacking of her flip-flops as she made her way to the door. I heard it open and then slam closed. The door was pretty heavy, and had slammed the same way when I had entered. I stayed for a moment and allowed the wave of relief to wash me over, before I reached for the lock. Then I paused, fingers only an inch from the lock. I stayed as silent as I possibly could, to try and confirm what I just thought. Yes, I heard breathing. The woman had only pretended to leave. At this point I was scared and confused. Why had she tried to trick me into thinking she had left to only stick around to be as quiet as possible? I knew something was very wrong, so I stayed in the stall even longer, and this time it must have been at least 20 minutes. But I had no way of knowing for how long I stayed in the stall. I could tell from the direction of her breathing was coming from the side she had positioned herself in the far corner, right next to the door, but far enough that I couldn't see her feet. Finally I heard her leave. This time I waited a few minutes to make sure she hadn't tried her trick again. I slipped out the stall, quickly washed my hands, and rushed down the hallway to the store. It was pitch black outside, and I had no idea where she was. She couldn't be far. A large man was checking out the register, so I waited near the window display until he left the store, and quietly slipped out the door behind him. Sure enough, crouched right outside the front door is the woman. She seemed surprised as she stood and turned away, walking quickly around the side of the store. My husband was waiting in the car and asked me if I was okay since I had taken so much longer than usual, and I said I would tell him all about it once we were away from the store. The Redditors who previously read about my experience had many theories, but the two most common ones were that she was a druggie that wanted to mug me, or that she worked with sex trafficking. I am open to any of your theories. I tried to see if there was anything in the news from around that time, but I couldn't figure out exactly where we were when this happened.
My father was chased by a killer, by marvelousism. This is my father's story. As a child, my father was a paperboy and he would get up very early in the morning to deliver them. My father would always end up with a few extra papers, so at the end of his route, he would offer papers to other early birds leaving for work and whatnot. On this day, my father offered a man who was sitting in a parked van. The man just stared at my dad and didn't respond, so my dad just went on about his way. As my dad was walking away, he heard a car door open and the sound of feet hitting the pavement. He turned around and saw the man running after him. My dad was very athletic in his day. He played basketball and baseball, so he just took off. The man chased him for a bit, but my dad knew the neighbourhood like the back of his hand and cut through the backyards and hop fences. He eventually lost the man and got home safely. He didn't tell his parents, but figured they would make him quit if he did. A few weeks then passed by, and 2 local boys went missing. Their bodies were found at a campground. They were shot and had other horrendous things happening to them. The man who committed this awful crime was William J. Wright. When my father saw his newspapers, he recognised that as the same man who chased him. Far From Home by Dank Dan. After sitting in traffic for some 3 hours on my way home from Maine, I was feeling a bit tired, so I stopped at the side of the road to get some shut-eye. It was around 9 o'clock, and I only meant to fall asleep for about half an hour. I then abruptly woke up and checked the clock in my car. It was 1:34 AM. I looked around and noticed that I was encased by thick forests and a bit of snow. When I got ready to continue my trip home, I saw something in the corner of my eye. I readjusted my rearview mirror, and standing next to the back passenger window was a person. His upper torso was out of sight from my point of view. He just stood there, not even moving an inch. I then just sat there, frozen in fear. I really didn't know what to do. I was just waiting for him to move. Eventually, he sluggishly walked away. Was he standing there for the whole time? I was twisted in thought the majority of the drive home, and when I got about 3/4 of the way home, my car got a bit fogged up from the heat. To my misfortune, this revealed handprints all over the windshield, the truck, all of it, all accompanied by little finger drawn eyes. I'm just glad that I locked the doors. The Woman Singing at Night by Average Doorknob. Growing up, I always wanted to go on a bike ride at night. Something about it seemed really cool to me. It wasn't until I was 13 that my mum finally let me. She told me to wear a helmet, have my phone, take a flashlight, and she sent the parameters where I was allowed to go and not. She gave me about 4 miles, which was a lot to me. So right after the sunset, I was off. I loved it. There were no people out walking their dogs, no kids running around, and the temperature was just perfect. It was really fun. It was so fun. I actually ignored all the limits my mum had set me. You see, where I was biking was all walking paths. It was one of those grassy areas between 2 neighbourhoods. There's this long path that went at least 600 feet in a 25-degree angle. I was flying downhill, having an absolute blast, and darted right past them parameters that my mum had set me. My mum set me these limits for a reason though. Everything on the inside was close to the houses and people. The outside, more specifically, this was a place where the path that I was on led to. It was very barren. I rode along this path for 10 minutes before I could see some lights of the houses on the insides of the limits. After about 15 minutes of riding along this dirt path, I heard singing. It sounded about 30 or 40 feet in front of me. I stopped riding to hear it better. It was a woman's voice. She was singing Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, but she wasn't singing the words, just the melody of the vocals. Her voice was strange. You know when you have the weird feeling and almost like you can't talk properly, where you're scared and your voice goes off? That was what she was singing like. I inch forward to try and see her. I get close enough to see the silhouette of her bouncing up and down like she was headbanging. I decided to get my flashlight out. I think that maybe this person is in need of help or something. I then get closer to her. Maybe she was just an insane person and the light will scare her away. I don't know. So I take the flashlight out of my pocket and point it at her and turn it on. The moment the light hit her, she stopped moving completely. She was then facing away from me. She had disgusting hair that seemed to be sticking together in clumps. Some of her hair was ripped off too. She was wearing a very oversized bright red hoodie. I was almost too scared to move. I think she was too. I conjured up as much bravery as I could and said, sorry, in a very, oops, this is the wrong room kind of way. She didn't reply. I then turned off my flashlight and put it back into my pocket. Just as I was turning my bike around, she screams. She screams in an awful, awful high-pitched voice. I nearly crapped myself as I threw myself back onto my bike. I then hear her voice getting closer to me. I book it as fast as I can. I don't bother looking behind me. I don't even stop pedaling. Her screaming is now growing quieter and quieter until it slowly dissolves into the darkness around me. My Favourite Customer by Korzor. From 2006 to 11, I worked in the electronics department at the local Walmart in the city which I lived in. For those 5 years, I had worked with plenty of weird people and customers, especially considering that the state hospital was directly across the road. This story isn't just a regular old creepy encounter, but something that would lead to me being stalked for nearly a year. It all started in 2010, on a night I was working my second shift. I was doing my end of shift rituals when a woman come in her late 40s interrupting me. She was with a little girl who was no more than 3 or 4 years old. Excuse me, I need help with my cell phone. She spoke softly and then proceeded to tell me about her problem. I need to turn my phone into a straight talk phone. The girl earlier said you could do it. Oh great, of course she did. I thought to myself, but my lips said, sure, let's see what I can do. She then handed me a 6-year-old phone from Verizon, and I knew as soon as I saw it that I wouldn't be able to do what she wanted. I explained she would have to buy a new phone from Straight Talk and transfer her old number across. Basic stuff really. Now, I always took my job seriously and held myself to the highest standard of customer service. The store would actually receive letters saying about how good I was, so I can assure you I did nothing to annoy this lady, and by God was she annoyed at me. Why the hell would I buy a new phone? I have one already. She's now beginning to scream louder and claims that I'm a corporate goon. I finally managed to defuse the situation as she left the department, and she gives me the classic, "You'll never get a job in this town again." Oh, great, I thought to myself. As I'm getting ready to leave my shift, my manager stops and tells me that I got a complaint at the customer service desk from a lady claiming that I swore at her granddaughter. I then explained what happened to my manager, and he just laughed it off. He knew it was very unlikely for me to say anything like that to a customer. Now I wish my story ended here, but it doesn't. otherwise I wouldn't be writing this. For the next several weeks, I would get complaints about the things I've never done. Sometimes even on my off days, I would go into work and get questions from management nearly every single day. It was complaints raging about me being rude to all the customers, all the way to me doing drugs in the parking lot on break. All of these complaints were coming from two women. As it turned out, it was a cell phone lady and her adult daughter. It turns out they'd even been scoping out my work schedule and started coming in nearly every day. They would walk through the electronics department just to make sure that they could see me in there. As soon as they did, they'd go and complain. This happened for several months. It happened so much that management deemed her a crazy woman that was a threat to me. To be honest, I didn't care much. I thought it was pretty funny. I never got in trouble and everybody knew these ladies were crazy and just blew it off. I started caring though when she took it to a new level. She started to follow me around. I would see her when I was around town. She made it clear she knew where I lived and would regularly walk past by my house. I would see her standing out the front just staring at my place. I then began getting complaints to the city about my property. Grass too tall, the old shed in the yard, my fire pit, basically everything. She even found out my girlfriend's name and began complaining about her work. I knew it was her. She would make it so clear that she was following me. Sometimes she would stop in and ask me questions at work and act like she was the nicest customer. And a few times she asked me things like, "How's your girlfriend?" Or my favourite, "How can you afford that big house on your little Walmart minimum wage?" For about 7 months she stalked me and slandered me. I started telling her I knew what she was doing and she had to stop. But she played it off. I couldn't report her. She never threatened me once. She was just making my life hard. By this time everybody in my life knew about this nut job. So one night, I'm grabbing dinner with my friend from work and we're joking about it when he says, "What if you just counter-stalk her?" At first, I thought this was a terrible idea. However, he was eventually able to convince me that it would work and that they would help me. So we hatched a plan. It went as follows: find her job, find her name and address, make complaints in the same manner as her, find out all the rumours she's told about me, make it clear that we know, show her that we have numbers. Now I found out the information easily enough. Turns out she didn't live anywhere near me though. It actually turned out that I was friends with a few of her co-workers. Crazy. They would keep informing me about this crazy woman and what she said about me, and even told her to stop though. We began doing exactly what she was doing on me then. We did this for about 4 months. The more we dug into her life, the more we found out about how obsessed she was getting in over me. She claimed I assaulted her. She urged others to report me and follow me. She told the police I was a potential drug dealer. Things were just getting absolutely crazy and out of hand. However, eventually we won. She started putting together the fact that there were 6 of us digging into her life and asking questions about her. My last month at work, I didn't even get a single complaint from her in fact. I never saw her anymore. The day after I quit though, I heard she was in the store complaining about a new person, asking why the managers let me quit. I'm honestly never going to understand why she was so hell-bent on destroying me. I just told her to buy a $20 prepaid phone.
Creep in the Bus by Joel999. I'm a 16-year-old guy, and I wasn't expecting this to happen to me, so I just want to point out that this doesn't only happen to women. 2 days ago, I was coming back from school. For background information, the bus students go to goes to the center of the town. I take that one, and then I take another bus to get to my stop. where I have to walk maybe 200 or 300 meters away from my house. I took the bus from the school towards the center, then waited at my stop. There were other kids from other schools that waited, and the creep. He wore his hat down and was glancing at me every now and then. I ignored him by putting my earphones on. This lasted for 10 minutes, until the bus finally came. I forgot about the guy, but was still creeped out. I got on the bus and took an empty seat. I noticed the creep get on the bus too, and he was walking towards me. My red flags weren't out yet, but I still checked just in case. He took a seat behind me, and then the bus started heading to the next stop. I heard something in the background of my music. I turned the volume down, and I heard a voice from behind me. From this same fucking guy. I pressed pause, and heard him ask, "Hey, I think we live near each other. Can you just tell me at which stop we're supposed to leave?" Of course, you'd think it's stupid of me to tell him the truth, but it'd be a bit of an asshole move to tell him bullshit if he lives near me. The bus approached near a stop, that is at 5 or 6 stops from my place. I changed seats, imitating as if I needed to get off the bus. The creep moved too. God damn it. He's lying and is following me. I then waited for one of the busier stops, and God was with me, because there was a crowd of teens, probably planning to smoke and drink. As soon as the doors opened, I ran the fuck away from the bus, and crossed the roads and entered some random shop. I kept my head down and looked out the window. As soon as the students were separating, I looked for the creep, and I could see him, looking for me. I took off my hoodie and put it in my bag. I then went to the bathroom to make my hair wet. I fucked up my hair to make myself look at least a little different. I then left the shop. I walked the long way towards the next stop, making turns at every possibility. After walking around a bit, I went to a small cafe, and waited there a bit. I sent a text to my dad if he could get me. He asked me why, and I told him the whole thing. He picked me up like Usain Bolt, and then drove me home. I don't know who the hell that guy was, and what the hell he planned out. I don't think he lives near me, and I fucking hope not. But whatever the fuck it is, creep in the bus? Let's not meet.
I Never Run Alone Anymore by Lime Not Lemons. My New Year's resolution in 2012 was to get into shape again. After my first kid was born, I lost my athletic interest, but I had every intention of getting it back. I started running 4 days a week with my friend Hannah, who is a great runner and motivator. We would run after work, usually 5 or 10 kilometers, favouring the forest trail. It was a pretty good place to go jogging. You could run at any time of the year really. Once you turn onto the lights, you've got a 45-minute run to the shorter trails and the longer runs beyond that. Then the lights turn off automatically. Now we had been running for about 2 months and we started seeing the same man hanging around the parking lot every time that we got there. This guy was 25 or 30 years of age. He was always dressed in sports clothes but never running. He never looked you in the eye either. We speculated that he could be homeless and camping nearby because he would constantly be there. We got used to seeing him, sitting somewhere close by, silently always on his own. We felt really sorry for him. He never seemed to talk or interact with anyone, but there was something about him that made us hesitate to talk to him or ask if he was okay. I can't pinpoint exactly what it was about him, but something didn't feel right. So Hannah couldn't make it to a run one evening and I decided to go on my own. I arrived at the parking lot, my car being the only car there. I did some stretches and turned on the lights and set off on my 5-kilometer trail. I hadn't seen the thin silent man when I started my run. Perhaps it was getting too cold for him to sit there now it was turning to autumn and dark and getting close to the freezing point. He must have been there though, just somewhere in the shadows, because when I got to the top of the first steep hill, I could hear heavy breathing somewhere behind me. I look over my shoulder and then I saw him. He is running like a man obsessed, in regular shoes, not running shoes, with his arms moving in a really strange stiff manner as if he was made of metal. His hands were like arrows. He was running in a straight angle, throwing his arms upwards, almost like a robot more than a sprinter. For the first time he looked me straight in the eyes. It was apparent that he had some kind of predatory, animalistic look, and it made my heart freeze. He had never done anything to harm me, or anyone else as far as I knew, but I knew the look in his eyes alone was enough to give me the chills, so I was facing a serious threat. I started running faster, trying to create distance between us, and I could then hear his heavy breathing getting even more closer as I strained. I ran like my life depended on it, adrenaline running through my body and giving me new strength. I tore off my necklace and threw it onto the ground, thinking, I must leave a trace if he takes me. Something must be left behind. I tried screaming, hoping somebody would be close enough to hear me. I did, but I couldn't scream and my lungs were hurting. Why is he doing this? What does he want? Who is he? I thought, as I started feeling my lungs burn. I then thought about my 15-month-old daughter and ran until I could taste blood in my mouth. He was still behind me, maybe 100 meters away from me. I figured that if I tripped and fell, or ran out of energy, or even fumbled with the car keys, I'm screwed. Once I reached the sharp turn in the trail, I went off and ran straight into the dark woods. I ran only a short distance and then laid down flat on my stomach, with my hands searching for a rock to defend me. I realised that I was wearing bright running clothes with reflexes and neon colouring. I couldn't have been more visible if I tried. As I was there waiting, I could hear him getting ever closer. I then heard him turn around. Thank God, he continued running too. I then started to slowly and silently as possible move further into the darkness. My heart then sunk as I heard rapid footsteps coming in from the trail. He had realised that I must have gone off the trail once he saw that there was no sign of me ahead. He stopped and I stopped. I could imagine him listening for any sound. I then held my breath and begged God that I didn't make anything to give away my position to him. After a while, I heard him saying something in a language that I couldn't comprehend and then walk off. I didn't move. I feared that he would wait for me by my car and realised that I had to get off the trail and go onto the main road and stop someone. I couldn't go back to the parking lot. I started to make my way further into the woods, knowing that I would eventually end up on the last part of the long trail and close to the main road. The lights on the trail then suddenly shut off. That made me calmer at first, but the dark was both a comfort and protection, but it didn't always help in situations like these. A few moments later, it switched on. This could mean that another person had just started their run, and soon I would have somebody there to help me, or somebody was out there looking for me, or maybe he was looking for me. I decided against my will to find out. I then continued my way towards the main road. I fell multiple times, getting my clothes wet and damp from the vegetation, making me begin to get cold. After what felt like a lifetime, I could see the 10-kilometer trail ahead and knew it was close to the main road. I then heard traffic. Once I made it to the road, I must have looked like I'd been in a terrible accident. Blood from several small cuts from the falling, dirt on my clothes and face. I assumed I looked petrified. My bright runners soon caught the attention of some passing cars. My waving and desperate shouting made it stop. The driver, who was a 40-ish-year-old man with his 2 kids in the back seat, spent the next 10 minutes or so trying to make sense of what I was telling him between crying and sobbing. He asked me if I wanted a lift back to the parking lot, and I told him no, just to take me home instead. At home, My husband insisted on going back to the parking lot to retrieve the car and calling the police. And report what, I asked. No crime had been committed. I just knew that he was out there to get me. My husband went back for the car. The driver's seat window was smashed and my phone was gone. So was a photo of my daughter hanging from the mirror. I don't know what he was trying to do to me, but by the way he chased me, by the look in his eyes, he was obviously up to no good. Creepy Late Night Intruder by Dimlit Dark 129. At the time, I was 10 years old and my mum was 42. It was Saturday night, and I and my mum were watching some documentary about how Snickers are made. That's not important. It was about midnight though, and we then heard a knock on the door. My mum didn't dare answer the door, but she had the courage to go up and see who it was. Here's how my entrance is laid out. There are 2 doors, and in between them there was a big large glass area. We could see through our doors because of the way the 2 glasses were. We could see that there was a scruffy man who was about 5'10" and skinny, but this man was particularly creepy. It was because of the way that he let himself into the glass entry that the door was closest to us. My mum asked him what he wanted, and he said in a raspy, scraggly voice at the door, "Hey, my wife locked me out of the house. I was wondering if I could use your phone." My mum hesitated to open the door, but eventually politely said, "No thank you." The man then just stared at her for what felt like 20 minutes. In reality it was probably 5. Eventually, without saying anything, he just walked out of the door. My mum then went round to make sure that all of the doors were locked and then come back in. My mum and I both thought that this was the end of it, but then, about 5 minutes later, our neighbour who works late night pulled into their driveway. We then got a call from that same neighbour, and she said that some guy was trying to climb over the fence to our backyard. My heart felt like it jumped out of my chest. My mum went out to the backyard and said she screamed at him to get out of our property or she'd call the cops. The guy immediately sprinted back and we never saw him again. I accidentally made a 40-something-year-old man scream while running from possible abduction by a hardy guard. About a week ago, I'd met some friends at a pub to say farewell as one of them was leaving the city to attend university. I'm always pretty skint, so I didn't drink at all by the time 9:30 rolled around. My friend and I were ready to leave and I started walking home. Walking this friend home would usually only leave me about 10 to 15 minutes of walking myself on my own, so I never really had any qualms about walking the rest of the journey myself. I'm a 19-year-old female, but I'm tall and I'm able to overpower the majority of my male friends, so in my head, I'm invincible. I live in a suburb at the edge of my city and it's a pretty wooded area. For some reason this particular night, I felt a gut instinct that something bad might happen. So instead of taking my usual route that included walking through approximately 40 seconds of overgrown bushes and almost complete darkness, I changed my route last minute and walked along a well-lit road knowing that this would add another 10 minutes to my journey. So I was walking with one earphone in, watching in front of me for my shadows to join. I then noticed that there was a headlight behind me and it wasn't passing. I then turn around and see a car idling at 10 miles per hour. The car slowly passes me about a meter in front and pulls up. I'm a bit of a paranoid person, and feeling uneasy, I acknowledged that the person was just being stupid but chose to cross the road before passing the car as just a matter of precaution. That's what I did. I then take another 10 steps or so, just before the car pulls out of its parking spot and then pulls up again right in front of me on the side of the path that I was now on. If any of you have ever seen the film Limitless, it felt exactly like the high the character portrays. I stopped dead in my tracks and calmly looked at the car. The engine is still running. A single passenger is in the driver's seat and he's turned to face me. I then look at my surroundings and it was like I thought of all the possibilities of what I could have done in my head within about 3 seconds. I never reached a conclusion before I suddenly turned and bolted down an alleyway that I was hoping would lead to a pedestrian route behind the 2 roads that run parallel with each other. At this point in time, I honestly didn't know what was going to happen, and I didn't care about anything except getting home intact. This is a part of the story that actually makes me laugh, but it isn't detrimental to the situation at all. After I bolt out of the alley and bolt along the pedestrian path, I was gaining speed on a man in his 40s while he was listening to music walking his dog. I must have scared the life out of him because the moment he saw me running towards him, he let out the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. I guess he felt pretty stupid when I just zoomed right past him. I then got to the bottom of the pedestrian path to a road that was sitting horizontally to both my route and the cars. There is visible sections of the road, but for the most part, it's still discreet and hard to see past the forested area. So sprinting through this bit, I was about to reach the subway that runs underneath the horizontal road into some housing areas. I look to my right where the bottom of the road matches up and I can see the guy stalling at the bottom of the road because the street lamps are behind him. I could then make out him leaning over looking about. I then pick up my pace and return home about 10 minutes later or so, completely safe and fine. I'm still not 100% sure what this sinister guy was thinking of doing, and I don't think I want to know. I just really want to ask one question. Did I have a right to be afraid to leave my house alone at night after this experience?
I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friend Amy and I, both females, would spend most days exploring the remote corners of New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon in March 2010, we were travelling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. Always up for exploring, we took a back road rather than travelling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on the NM55. It's remote, teeny, tiny 2-lane highway. We loved those types of roads, up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and desolate desert. You can see for miles, and there is virtually nothing except for dirt and rocks between towns, and towns that can be miles apart. So we were on the NM55 going north. After a few minutes, we saw a white pickup truck ahead of us going the same direction. Suddenly, he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer, we began to get uneasy. We could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were about half a mile away from him when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, but his truck was still pointed in the direction we were going to. We tried to relax a little. Surely this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was checking something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a few things. 1. There was only one person in the truck, a middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off us. And 2, he was talking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and started following us, but he never got too close. He would get to within a few car lengths, and then drop back a little, and then speed back up again to within a few car lengths. We were getting nervous. We realised how alone we were. We had seen no other traffic on that road, and we hadn't told anyone about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our cell phones, and neither one of us had signal, typical for remote New Mexico, but scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up, while I frantically checked the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. There was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a good option. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us. He was going very slowly, maybe 20 miles an hour, if that. This pickup was old and beat up, whereas the one behind us was newer. Amy had us up to 75 miles an hour, which wasn't typically for us on those 55 mile per hour highways, and we blew by the old pickup as we passed it. We saw that it was another middle-aged guy, and he was talking into a walkie-talkie. After that white pickup passed him, he did a U-turn and pulled in behind it. As we watched all this, we could see the white pickup truck guy talking into his walkie-talkie. No doubt these two knew each other. We were being deliberately followed, and for the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road, but truly thought old beat up pickup guy had set up a trap in the road as our vehicle would be somehow disabled. We talked about driving into the fields. We were an SUV, but this was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what would happen if we went off the road and got cornered, so we stayed on the highway. By now, white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking into the walkie-talkie, and he stayed right on our bumper, and old beat up pickup truck guy was right on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway. The white pickup inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got to within inches of our back bumper. Amy floored it and we were passing 80 miles an hour and edging up to 90. The road was flat and deserted, but any little thing gone wrong could have been catastrophic. We absolutely were not going to slow down or stop if we could help it. The white pickup pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think of is that he wanted to pass us and get in front of us. If he had got in front of us and his buddy was behind, then we'd be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of us. Our only option was to off-road it. Should we risk it? Could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? As we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, and it pointed towards a road on the left. And right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled out of that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up to the blue pickup, we saw the plate said US Park Service. We looked at each other and looked behind us. Both pickup trucks did U-turns and went the other way. We followed the blue pickup to Mountain Air and made our way to Albuquerque. I don't know exactly what those guys' intentions were, but they weren't good. There is something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police and they said they would keep an eye on things. This area is very near Belen, NM, which is where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from the Elephant Boot, which is where David Parker Ray had his little secret torture laboratory. But we didn't put all that together until later. Even though David Parker Ray had died by the time this happened to us, we do believe that there are others out there like him, and whoever had abducted Tara has never been caught. Or maybe we came into meth lab territory, but since this happened on an actual highway rather than a backcountry road, I tend to discount the meth lab theory. Whatever is going on out there, it's not good.
Military Wife Home Alone by Liz, Lon and Prosper. So my husband, Ted, is in the military. We have generally lived on base at every station, and we have been because the surrounding towns can be very crime-ridden and sketchy. With my husband gone, I appreciate the extra security. I work from home due to us moving so often, so one afternoon I was taking a break. I had made a bite to eat and was snuggling up on the couch with my dog. That's when I heard the sliding glass door open. It was so non-galactic and I thought it was Ted. I saw my cat run from the kitchen and a shadow standing near the door entering it. I thought maybe he had come back for something, so I called out for him like, "What are you doing home? Did you forget something?" I got no answer. This is when I got that eerie feeling. After I asked what he was doing, I then saw a shadow move and heard the click of the door sliding back. From there, he then walked into the laundry room and shut the door. I still received no response. So I'm sitting on the couch, scared out of my mind, and I call my husband hoping to hear his phone in the laundry room. I don't hear a ring, but he answers. I asked him why he came home early and he didn't answer me. All he says is this: "That wasn't me. Grab the dog and get into your car now." I freaked out. After getting off of the phone with my husband, I grabbed the dog and run to my car. From there, I called the military police. Waiting for them was probably the longest 20 minutes of my life. When they got back, they cleared the house and found no one. They asked me to make a statement and they were even baffled by the fact that somebody could make it onto the base. We still live here. I'm still scared that he's gonna come back. Crazy Thanksgiving Night by Wanderer Not Lost. So I'm a male nurse at a large hospital in San Francisco. I work in the ER, and as is custom, Thanksgiving is a very busy night. Now my wife is also a nurse at the same hospital and she works in labour and delivery. Now between babies being born left, right and centre and people coming into ER, we hadn't had a chance to take a break together as we normally try and do every shift. So when she called me, I figured she was going to tell me that she wanted to meet up to eat in the cafeteria. When I answered though, however, I heard in the background a male voice screaming profanities and my wife, who is fluent in Spanish, trying to calm this guy down. She told me their pager wasn't working and they needed security stat. I quickly hung up and called for security and told my fellow nurses what was going on. I then ran for labour and worried sick about my wife. I almost ran square into this guy who was visibly angry. He wasn't huge but definitely worked out and not at the gym. He was covered in prison tattoos and was obviously a banger. I go to the gym quite often but this guy could really have beaten me up. He then starts running towards me with this sick grin on his face. He's shouting at me in Spanish. I don't even speak fluent Spanish but what I could understand scared the living hell out of me. I'm backing up as fast as I can. I start buzzing the door to the ER frantically trying to get them to let me in. This guy is now literally a foot away and the door opens and I'm pulled in straight away by another doctor. He then starts punching the door furiously and he looks at me and does this drag in sign across his throat. The next thing I know, there are police rushing into the corridor and it takes 2 security officers and 2 cops to try and subdue this guy. I then finally make it to my wife, who was thankfully shaken up but not hurt. She explained to me what happened. A young girl who was only 14 came in, high fever, vomiting, distended belly. The banger claimed he was her brother and they needed to cut her open to get the baby out. They did an ultrasound and to their horror, they realised she wasn't pregnant but she had bags full of drugs in her stomach. It's very common for drug mules to bring over young women from Mexico to carry drugs in this way. He then freaked out when they told him that his sister needed emergency surgery. The girl survived thankfully but it seems like she's probably going to get deported after she recovers from the surgery, sadly. Waitress Closing Alone at Night by Izzy Mary. When I used to work as a waitress around 2 years ago, I would close with my female manager and one dish boy. He only spoke Spanish. Anyway, one night it was dead. A group of 4 guys came in and sat at the counter looking to try and carry out something. I was just busy cleaning, getting ready to close, and after about half an hour to go, these guys started acting strange. Some were looking around while whispering to each other. They were there for a good 10 minutes. They were not even paying any attention to the menu whatsoever. I then noticed that 2 of the guys were at the entrance of the restaurant, and then they had 2 cars waiting by them which were still running. At this point, I got nervous. The one dish boy was busy cleaning the kitchen and my manager was in the office doing paperwork. So here I am, alone. I honestly thought anything could have happened to me then. I mean really, to be honest, it could have. But then, not even 5 minutes later, 2 police officers came in who were regulars for dinner. As soon as they got in, all of the guys left without a hesitation. When the 2 officers left, they asked me if I was okay. I told them I was fine, just a little freaked out by that moment. They then told me that those guys were probably just going to rob the diner and that I was lucky that they come in so late. It was perfect timing. Hello everyone, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I want to say a massive thank you to BlameitonJorge for featuring on this one. He's a pretty big YouTuber and he has a really good channel. I've actually been a fan of him and his content for a long time, and every video he does is just really interesting. I'll leave a link in the description to his channel, so make sure you go and check out his stuff and subscribe to him. Thank you, George. I want to say thank you to my twin too, ThatCreepyPastaGuy, who actually featured on this video as well. We work with each other a lot and he didn't fail to deliver on this video. Make sure you go and check him out and subscribe to his content too. I'll leave both the channel links in the description. Thank you everybody for watching, I hope you all enjoyed. If you have any narrators you'd like to see me work with, then please leave a comment below letting me know. I hope you all have a good day and take care. I'll talk to you all soon.